start with a proverb saying, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of shark." This is a proverb that was told to me by a refugee when I asked him, "Why did you move out?" So the meaning of his answer was that his home was really a shark mouth. It reminded me of the horrible film Job. So we can say that the Arab world constitutes of 5% of the world population. However, it brings out 35% of the refugees of the world. The high influx of migrants, refugees, and asylum applicants to Europe continues to top political concerns. The crisis has evolved from an economic issue into a security and integration crisis. We really need to know how the situation has since evolved. Review some of the drivers behind the choice of destination of refugees and discuss some of the ways the EU is trying to address the different issues arising from the ongoing crisis. The so-called migrant crisis or refugee crisis in the EU has been ongoing now for years. The crisis is characterized by a large number of non-EU citizens making their way to Europe, primarily from Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, into EU countries via different migratory routes. The civil war in Syria is considered to be a major driving factor to this migration. However, Syrians are not the only citizens leaving their countries to seek out for a safer place. Migration is also being increasingly driven by wider insecurity in Africa, the Middle East, at the hands of Daesh, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and others. High levels of poverty and economic insecurity in Africa, example, Pakistan and non-EU European countries such as Albania, is also driving irregular migration. Climate change and its impact on food security, disease, competition for resources and land, housing in African and Asian countries will also increasingly push people towards countries who are richer. So these countries will have to look more resilient to the negative impacts of these climatic shocks. Now with our speakers that I will present, we will go through these points. I would like to start with Dr. Nancy O'Keel, who is the Executive Director of the Tahrir Institute for the Middle East Policy, a non-for-profit research and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. She has more than 15 years of experience working on issues of democracy, rule of law, human rights.
Of the people who move there and the needs of the host country. It's not always perfect, and I know also in the EU it's a learning process of improving the immigration policies in order to be better at the way things are. The only thing I want to say before we move to Dimitri is that I think the EU is doing the best they can, and there is certainly an improvement throughout the years. However, the only thing I would say is that there needs to be a balance between the focus on border control and the focus on the reasons why these people leave their countries in the first place. So according to Amnesty International, between 2007 and 2013, before the crisis, the EU has spent 2 billion euros on fences and surveillance equipment and support. Last month, there was an announcement that there is a plan to actually increase that between 2021 to 2027 into 33.9 billion euros. That's actually much higher than the EU investment in international development and support. It is understandable how is there a dire need to maintain the border controls and increase the guards and the surveillance. However, these are all immediate solutions. They're not sustainable. And the way to actually address the real problem is to try to balance this with addressing the issues that actually lead those people to leave their home and move to these countries.
Thank you for the briefing. Do you think that Europe
refugees into their own cultures? This is the next question to you after I go and listen to our political expert here on the panel. You know that now lots of refugees are, especially in Greece, you have obvious problem of having all of these refugees. You have in 2014, 662,000 people applications in Europe in general. In 2015, you have 900,000 applicants, and it's going up. And you have only, in Greece alone, you have 60,000. So how do you think the policies can be formulated in order to take these refugees in, or migrants? Because now we're not yet finished the discussion, migrant or refugee. First of all, tell us what you think migrant or refugees, and what are the best policies to be followed.
I think it is very important, this distinction between refugees and migrants, for legal reasons, first of all, but also in order to know the motivation behind the decision of somebody to leave his or her country. But when it comes to the receiving state, the country, the difference is important, but it's not the major criterion. So I'm afraid that whenever we like it or not, the border controls that we just heard from Nancy that are absorbing a lot of money from the European countries will become stronger and stronger. I think that this is inevitable, whenever we like it or not, because I think that there is no democratic state that can defend in front of its own citizens that it is not capable of controlling its borders. Controlling the borders does not mean inhuman treatment of the refugees or the migrants, but controlling the borders, I think, is a precondition for every democratic society to protect its space. I am afraid that this tendency to give more emphasis to the border control will continue at European level. But allow me first a very quick overview of the European Union involvement in this migration issue. Because some 20, 30 years ago, the European Union did not have any competence at all on migration. It was a pure national competence, and most of the member states were very adamant to preserve this competence because they thought that this is the very hard core of their national sovereignty. So there was a lot of negative reaction in any effort of the European Commission, for example, to communitarize these issues. The turning point, the European Union at that time, the European communities, was competent only for the free movement of community workers, from citizens of the EU member states that were moving from one country to another to find a job. May I remind you also that in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, the main migration movements were done through bilateral agreements between the European countries, the member states, not the European Union, and third countries. The objective was for some young male, mainly, to go work for a couple of years to France, to Germany, to Belgium, and then go back. This was the case with European countries like Greece at the time, who was not a member of the European Union, but also from countries of the Mediterranean. But the main, let's say, the majority of these migrants were Europeans, either from the Balkans, South Europe, Mediterranean Europe, or Eastern Europe. This has changed dramatically in the last, let's say, 10 years, and now the majority of the migrants or the refugees are coming from non-European countries. So, this transfer of competence from the member states to the European Union organs and institutions is still going on. Many important competences are still national in the European Union. For example, it is not Brussels, but it's a member state that decides today how many non-Europeans will be allowed to come into a country, let's say UK, to find a job and how many will have a work permit or a residence permit. This is not dictated by Brussels, and I think this is very important because in the referendum to Brexit, for the Brexit, a lot of false information, fake news were circulated in the UK as if Brussels was responsible for the dramatic increase of foreigners living and working in the UK. The European legislation obliges only to receive EU nationals, and you cannot discriminate against them. But it is up to each country to decide how many citizens of an Arab country or an African country will be allowed in. Now, there is a process of more and more competences given to the European level, and this is because of the creation of the internal market and the elimination of borders. With the internal market, the Europeans decided that there will be no controls in the internal borders of the European Union. So it was necessary for that reason to have an external control so that everybody that is coming in the internal market can move freely afterwards. Now, this process is, as I said, is going on, but there is also a big, I think, change in the political, if you wish, the political aspect of migration. In the 60s and the 70s, the issue or the problem of migration was mainly an issue of labor market and economics. Today, I would say, unfortunately, it is more a matter of identity. And because many European countries, many European nations, many European people are going through an identity crisis, the issue of migration does not only have the economic or the social aspects, but it has a very deep identity aspect. And that's why it is very difficult to find a common ground among the 28 or 27 member states and to have a real global migration policy. It is the same difficulty that we are facing when we are trying to harmonize the foreign policy. Because foreign policy is also not only about interests, where it is easy, to make a bargaining and say, okay, you lose there, I give you something elsewhere. It is about values and identities and about historical perceptions. The same goes for migration today, which is linked to the identity crisis that the whole West, but also Europe, is going through. And that's why I think one needs to be patient, and it will take a long time to find a common European migration policy.
Thank you. So far means that no policies in common for the European countries. No one policy so far.
No,
and
Europe has done. I mean, I didn't have the time to explain all that, but in the last, let's say, 5 years, Europe has done very important steps towards harmonization and common actions by the creation of the Frontex to control the borders, but also to the common asylum system. So there is a lot of progress, but we are still not in a situation where you can say that Europe has a common migration policy as the United States have, or as Canada, or as Australia. So I think that this will take time, but this does not mean that the European policy, when it will be common, will be more liberal than it is today. I think that it will be more restrictive.
Even more strict, right? That's maybe a little bit scary for what's the number of refugees that might come, even more with the non-stable political situation in the Middle East. 68 million refugees in the world, and maybe they chose me because I am Palestinian to moderate this session, because Palestinians, they constitute 6 million refugees. It's the highest, one of the highest in the world for one population. So now let's move to the solutions. Now we have this crisis for refugees. So far no one answered me. I will leave this question for you later on, after we finish. Migrant or refugees. I'll take some answers from you after I go to our third and waited for speaker, Mr. Arif Bourguan. what are you're engineer, you IT, you work in the CCC, and you work in construction. What can be the solutions for this influx of refugees and migrants? I know you prepared for us a nice presentation, so please, the floor is yours to answer this question.
To make a difference when it comes to building homes, whether for refugees, for homeless, or for whoever needs a decent shelter. And our commitment is obviously towards the communities where we operate as CC, but our commitment is more at large to the United Nations 17 goals that we are proudly committed for. Being also a very active member of the World Economic Forum, along with other leaders in the construction arena and BCG Group, under the umbrella of World Economic Forum, we explore different technologies that can help in developing what we think of as the future of construction. Let's see how this can help the resolve, or at least ease the crisis of refugees, homeless, and others. What we envision as part of this forum is basically envisioning affordable housing. Can we build houses that are cheaper than now, that we will allow the same money instead of solving one house to solve two houses? Can we build houses much faster than we used to do? Can we build a house in days instead of doing it in months or years in case there is a crisis and we need to move fast? And third, and maybe equally important, can we build houses that are sustainable? We saw a very good presentation of renewable energy this morning. We took a very realistic approach for collaboration. We like the C's, so I use the C's to elaborate on how we do collaborate. Is basically with centers and facilities. We collaborate with startups, mostly European startups and some Arab startups, technology startups that will help us in that pursuit. And of course, we partner with regional countries in the Gulf region, especially where the vision of the leaders is to support such initiative, be it for refugees, homeless, or for the sake of one of being the region in the Gulf, one of the most demographically growth area in the world. So this is what we're doing. Can we do? And lately we have started many initiatives under this umbrella. As I said, in collaboration with European and Arab technology startups, we have just finished building a house and 3D printing concrete in one of the Gulf region. And basically, the same house that can host a small family, a refugee family, that used to take months will be taking days or weeks maximum to build. And this is a complete house. So this is something that will allow government to react faster than ever, hopefully, in solving a crisis problem. Also, we're exploring the second area that we're exploring, using robotics in construction. There is one called fast robotic instead of, and this is not only to compete with labor. I know some people might take this way, but it's also to make the construction faster, more efficient, and cheaper. And sometimes the construction takes place in dangerous zone, so the robots can take the duty of a human being and allow us to execute our job safely. And besides 3D printing and printing a house instead of building it, besides robotics, we're also exploring modular construction. So like you buy furniture probably from IKEA and you assemble it at home, so probably we can manufacture our houses the same, prefabricate our houses, and then whenever we need them, we just assemble them to solve a crisis, whichever type of that crisis is. So these are the three things that we are collaborating now with many technology startups in Europe and the Arab world to help solve these problems. Most importantly, and we saw a very good presentation this morning about renewable energy, how can we make these houses green, sustainable? Besides our care about the environment, we know for a fact that many of the homeless, the refugees, reside in areas where the utility grids cannot reach. We don't have electricity. We have to rely on generators, which is very expensive and pollutes the environment. We live in Greece. We have so much sun and wind. We have wind energy we can see everywhere, and we have solar systems we can see anywhere. But how can we provide a solution that whenever the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing, that we still have power? And this is what's the solution that we did, that we operate 24/7 round the clock. It's an off-grid solar system, or a house, or a cabin, whatever you call it, that can operate 24/7, and we tested it in the Gulf region in 5 countries, where outside temperature is 50 degrees. It maintains 24/7 indoor temperature of 25 degrees Celsius, and that's solely powered by solar, and the extra power is being stored in batteries, and at night the batteries are launched to supply the house. So if we have a house that we need to put out of nowhere, and we don't have electrical grid reaching there, this solution can help us extend the grid and of course have a green solution. Thank you.
Better than on Arab borders between Iraq and Syria, Jordan, things are becoming very difficult. So if we go back to you, Dr. Nancy, how can we integrate? Now, we notice the news, how they cover everything that has to do with migrants, refugees. Whenever there is an assault, let's say, in a street in Greece or any other, in Germany, it passes like any other incident. But whenever the doer is one of the refugees or migrants, or even have a dark skin, the news is covered differently. And this enhances more this difficult cultural shock and the distance between the migrants who come and the hosting countries. How do you think we can bridge this? Is there a solution to make things go better?
Yes, as you described the problem, there is this, if we can put it simply, there is a huge issue of trust. When Europeans or some of the host countries would see every Arab or Middle Eastern as, if not a terrorist, as a potential one. But I was very pleased today, like starting with the speech of the Prime Minister and many others afterwards, speaking about the idea, the concept of Islamophobia, and that there's this leadership that is leading the understanding that this is an extreme view, this is not actually the case. So leadership of those countries has a lot of potential to actually change that attitude, but media as well. I mean, media by nature is like very exaggerating in order to capture the audience. It doesn't actually have a nuanced view of those people. But at the same time, the people of the host country, the people of the European Union, has all the right to be fearful. Some people would just like label that as racism, but this is not coming from thin air. A bomber in Tunisia, just next to the Ministry of Interior. And these indications keep on as a sort of a continuous and perpetual reminder for people that these people are a source of threat, rather than an opportunity, which they are. There's so many of them are, first of all, like the opportunity of having this young population, like the high level of the percentage of youth coming from the Middle East is actually a great opportunity for the EU, and that needs to be emphasized. And also the need to have sort of a balance for reintegration, the match between skills and the needs of the industries and employment. Another thing that is really damaging by the media is always portraying that the immigrant or the refugees is out there to take my job opportunity in the EU, that their presence is a threat for their own economic stability and prosperity. So this is also another issue that is very important to address. And finally, of course, I mean, there is another problem that is not for the EU, but for the countries where the refugees and the immigrants live. There is a huge issue of brain drain, where right now when we look and try to actually reach out to experts, analysts, people who would work even like with organizations like ours, it's very hard to find people who are there because everyone is leaving to other places because of what they are suffering and seeing in the countries that they have left from war and terrorism and all the threats that they face. But again, it's just like there are great solutions like the printing of houses. This is great, but also there is a mid-level of capacity building. I've seen a lot of people coming from the Middle East who used to be journalists and engineers. They go to the host country and the jobs that they get are gardeners or drivers. Not that this is any thing downgrading to have those jobs. The issue is that the mismatch. They did not raise the skills to be employing those skills in that way. So I think one of the other things in the practical way is the programs that focus on the capacity building of those people so that they become more of an opportunity rather than a threat or a burden on the host countries.
Thank you. Talking about opportunity, the World Bank published a report saying that the economic growth for Germany it's 0.3% because of the refugees. For Switzerland was projecting for 0.4%. For Sweden, 0.5% of economic growth. So refugees can have really a bright side if we look at the bright side or the half full glass. How can we really integrate them into these societies? So if I move to you, Dimitris, and how can we stop this influx of refugees and migrants? Because now Europe has a large number, and already you need to deal with it as Europeans. And I don't think it's even if we find a house for them, even if we make media campaigns about Islam, about what is Middle East is, what is the culture, etc., etc. This will not be resolved very quickly. This will take years. I know that media is not helping a lot in the way they deal with migrant issues and refugees issues. Dimitris, how can we solve this for the future?
I mean, if we want to be direct and
Yes,
see the
please,
truth,
especially direct.
see the truth as it is, I tried to mention this in my previous intervention. It is not an economic issue. As I said, it is an issue of identity. And this makes things much more complicated. So, I very much appreciate what was said by the representative of CCC. I think they are doing a great job. For the short-term crisis management, technology can be of help and to provide quick housing, etc. But we all know that although poverty is going down, and poverty has been reduced dramatically in the last 30, 40 years all over the globe, the pressure for migration is increasing. So it is not mainly because of poverty or because of lack of adequate housing that our people want to move to Europe or to the West. The main reason is the bad governance, the lack of good governance, the lack of freedom, of liberty, and the lack of perspectives. On the other side, we have to acknowledge that there is no any universal obligation of every democratically elected government in Europe or in America or in Australia to provide, let's say, adequate job opportunities to all the people that might wish to move. And because of communication and because of transport, modern technologies, it is much more easy for somebody who is sitting in Pakistan to see how people are living elsewhere and to move, to try to move. Perhaps 20 or 30 years ago, the difference of the life, living standard was bigger, but at that time, it was much more difficult to communicate.
You're suggesting that
I'm
European
suggesting
countries to help them in their countries?
Exactly, because I think that we are now reaching, let's say, the upper border of what the integration in our European societies is possible, and that's why the European Union, who is, anyway, has always been the biggest donor of development aid. I think the only long-term solution is to try to assist those countries, and I'm not speaking about refugees, I'm speaking about immigration. And there are countries like Pakistan who have a declared policy in their economic plan to promote their citizens to move abroad. So I think this cannot go on like that. So the European Union has already invested a lot, is going to invest even more for the development of these societies, but it's up also to the elites of these societies to make an effort to have a better governance, to have more freedom for their people.
Thank you, Arif. What do you suggest to stop the influx of refugees and migrants?
Well, let's focus on refugees. If we go back in history and we realize that the foreign policy that could have prevented these wars in the first place, maybe we wouldn't have had refugees and we wouldn't have been having a drink now rather than sitting here, all of us. From Iraq to Syria, passing by Libya and many other countries. I think migrants can run away, as the gentleman said, from bad government, but refugees came from wars. And had it been, had the war prevented these wars, rather than either overlooking or somehow major powers intervened in invading other countries, we wouldn't have seen refugees in the first place. And this would have been the best solution. No one wants to leave this country, especially in war conditions, I'm sure.
That's true, Arif. I think as well some European countries, they even intervene in the policy of some Arab countries where there are more instability, and it fires back on these countries where they have more refugees coming, seeking safer place. Mostly are families with kids who come to look for just calmer place or safer place, and there they face
the proximity of Europe to the Arab world.
Yes.
So Europe would never really have solved this problem. Wouldn't be solved. People cannot swim to the United States, but they can swim to Greece. There's a big difference.
Yes, so promoting sustainable peace in the Middle East and maybe intervening less in their internal policies. Stopping smugglers, it's one of the points I read about. The smugglers are, they promote bringing in people who are simple sometimes minded, who think that they have any lives in Europe. So I will move now to you and three simple, if you can choose three people to answer the question, refugee or migrant, and why the media is pushing towards the usage of the word, migrant instead of refugees. Who would like to answer?
Yes, my name is Viola Edwards. I was born in Kirkuk, Iraq. Migrated to Lebanon at the age of 5.
I'm Englishman, so we don't know what's next. But what I wanted to share with you is that all this time I've been a migrant, and it seems like just little after we moved, many of my family members or friends become refugees. And I can see now in the situation of Venezuela, which is a country who received so many of us coming from all over the world, are in this situation now and are struggling, and the fear and the I don't know how to describe that word. They just don't want to be refugees. They just
needs to be treated. Thank you. In Europe, the Islamophobia thing has to be dealt with. The media has to be more cooperative, stopping demonizing any case where there's a crime committed by a refugee or an immigrant. So it needs a full social tissue in cooperation with the media to try to put down the effects, the negative effects of having a lot of refugees and migrants, avoiding the cultural shock, etc. So I would like to thank our speakers, Arif, Dimitris, and Nancy, having put us in this image. Maybe it looks blurry now, trying to build houses or trying to build policies that are not there, trying to gap the cultural shock or bringing in more minds together, shared by our three beautiful really speakers. I hope you're not bored during this 45 minutes session. Thank you very much. Big applause for our speakers and for everyone who stayed with us until this time. I would like now to invite the chair of the next session, Maria Nicotio, please. Maria, are you here? We will try to carry